So I was asked to look at two completely separate issues in two properties, two flats, top flat and bottom flat. The top flat, there was a mysterious damp patch that was assumed to be connected with the chimney. In fact, this is caused by hygroscopic salts. Here's my friend ChatGPT's attempt at explaining hygroscopic salts, and here's my explanation. So with hygroscopic salts, so I'm going to put it onto, this is the damp meter I'm going to recommend.
It always goes up with that.
They're always going to be, it's always going to be damp. You're not getting rid of them, but equally they are not a source of water. They are salts that are attracting water in the same as silicon gel attracts water. You know, they're sacrificial salts, if you like. So it's always going to be have a high damp meter reading.
Right.
However, if you follow my recommendations, use oil-based primer such as Zinza. I would probably put 2 coats on, and if you find sometimes you have to just add another coat until eventually it solves it. But
should we sand this off? Sand the existing paintwork off first and get back to the plasterboard and then do it?
No, I don't think it's just plasterboard, is it?
I don't know.
No, it's plaster. Oh. No, you don't have
paint,
to. Just paint it. Just paint it.
Cool.
You just so Zinza Bin, B-I-N. I'll put it on the recommendations, but it's primer. It's an oil-based primer. Not all their primers are oil-based. It's important that it's oil-based because you're trying to stop the moisture coming through, because hygroscopic salt, so calcium nitrate is the likely one, is going to dissolve in any moisture. So you'll find with damp proofing treatment, even though theoretically it's there to block the salts, it's put on wet and it's got some moisture in it, and often the salts just come back through again. So you know, you'll find damp proofers resort to my recommendations in the end. I'm showing the whole flat in a thermal video because there are a lot of areas where the loft insulation is missing, and you would do a lot to reduce energy usage and to reduce the risk of condensation and mold if you just insulate the little parts of the loft that is missing. I would recommend a double quilted 300mm across 300mm of loft insulation. You may well find that the government is offering grants, I'm not sure at the moment. In the indoor environment, hygroscopic salts tend to come from the burning or historic burning of coal in Victorian properties. You often find it around chimney breasts. They cause what is called deliquescence, which is a type of condensation below 100% relative humidity. Typically for calcium nitrate it's around 50% relative humidity. For normal table salt it's around 75% relative humidity. I looked at the chimney breast, but there was nothing wrong with the chimney. I also checked the ventilation. The kitchen has no externally ducted extractor fan. The bathroom vent is working well, but it doesn't remain on. The door should be kept closed to keep the humidity in, and use a dehumidifier whenever drying clothes internally. Now looking downstairs, to start with we can see render cracks on the outside. These are bound to cause dampness. They may not cause penetrating damp, but they're liable to dampen the external brick, causing heat loss, increasing the risk of condensation. Those dots or bullet holes at the base of the wall show that the property has been damp proofed against rising damp, although the risk is extremely low because it's in London and not above ground water bearing rocks. The primary concern in this property is mold in the cupboards, and also some flaking calcium sulfate salts in the corner here. Dampness has appeared there and up here since the renovation, so before it was fine. There were high damp meter readings on the surface, less so at depth. I encourage you to buy one of these damp meters so you can find out whether your wall is drying out. This cartoon by ChatGPT illustrates how mold is inhibited by hygroscopic salts. Hygroscopic salts are not only found in historic burning of coal and in equine urine, but they're also in groundwater. Rising damp, which comes from groundwater, you wouldn't have mold. Mold is also growing in the second bedroom's little cupboard here, little box. The reason why you've got mold is that you've got excess vapor, but possibly more importantly, you've got air, humid air that's trapped against a cold surface. The outside is extremely cold because you've got two sides on. You're also ground floor, and ground floor gets less sunlight and tends to be colder at the base. You can also see outside there are reasons for cold. These thermal images highlight heat loss. Blue is colder than red and orange. Mold is caused by high surface relative humidity. Surface relative humidity is a function of both vapor in the air and temperature. So these cracks may well allow water through. That is penetrating damp, but largely what happens is just a little bit of water gets onto the external skin, and a damp brick is a poor insulator and it causes heat loss, which increases the risk of condensation and mold. But there are no signs of penetrating damp inside, but that may be because it's hidden by the cupboard. Either way, the easiest and best solution is to fill these with an acrylic-based caulk, external acrylic-based caulk, and then paint them and just keep in an eye. Even replacing the wall is going to expand and contract and risk cracking again, just as this wall has done. The worst cracks are the horizontal ones because more water can pour down them on the wall. Obviously a vertical one is less, it absorbs less water, but often these are actually superficial. So this one here is probably superficial. This one may be superficial. It's difficult to tell. Either way, I think you should fill them. It's really, it'll take somebody half a day to do the work. Also, I'd say the base of the wall, you should have a fillet of cement all the way along here, just to push water away from the wall. These people have done what a lot of surveyors recommend, which is a bell cast. I personally don't, because what you have is an area of heat loss at the base of the wall, which increases the risk of condensation internally. And you'll see here, they've got a sacrificial line so that there's two sections of render that can move slightly different rates to allow for expansion contraction, and then this has to be filled, but you don't have that in this case. Instead you have these lines which look quite vertical, and probably the way that the render was applied in the first place. Of course, another alternative is to insulate, but I wouldn't just render for the sake of rendering. Remember also that you've got metal here, that's going to increase heat loss. And in fact, where most of the mold is internally, you've got this damp proofing treatment, and unfortunately the byproduct of damp proofing treatment is reducing a wall's natural ability to absorb vapor, and therefore it increases the mold and condensation risk. You've also got corner and you've got metalwork. All of these will create increased heat loss. But I'm going to make lots of recommendations, but we'll deal with the vapor in the first instance. In addition, I think you might consider some insulation, some additional insulation, if not behind the cupboard, within the cupboard, but you can do it in a way that's barely noticeable. So you are getting additional heat loss from this, which is presumably a passive vent, And this, which is presumably lighting, that's the subfloor ventilation for the cellar, which in itself will create heat loss. But in addition, the crack. But I'd say of all the things, the crack is probably the least, causing the least amount of heat loss compared to this, which will be covered in this. There's more, and then of course the corner, which has a lot of heat loss as well. So when we look back at the thermal image of the small box in the second bedroom, we see there's a lot of heat loss that looks like it's created by the lighting on the outside and the air brick, which is blocked by the box. I'm not a fan of passive vents, but they create heat loss, and really they should be covered with insulation of one form or another. Other matters. I was asked to comment on a brown stain from moisture above an RSJ in the kitchen. At the time of the survey, the stain was dry, despite having had a recent spell of rain. This leads me to believe it's probably more likely interstitial condensation, that is condensation forming on the ceiling above. What happens with RSJs is that they're metal and they cause a lot of heat loss. However, I also think you should treat it as if it's a render crack. I understand that your builder had to go back up and re-render the corner, and that the crack has appeared since that render work. But really, it's a very easy job. It's just a case of slightly opening the gap out and putting in some acrylic caulk and then painting, making sure you paint with an impermeable paint such as Zinsser or Dulux. Likewise with these gaps and cracks, they should be filled, large ones with cement-based mortar, small ones with an acrylic-based external caulk. Yeah, but I don't think they're the root cause of your dampness. And here see, this is old moss that's grown here. The water's obviously come out of the guttering at some stage, but the guttering looks relatively new. There's some cracking there. So this could be hiding a crack, as in here. So that could cause problems, but they're not the root cause of your dampness. Now looking in the basement or cellar, which is an area that is expected to be damp because it's below ground level and you get percolation of rainwater, the other thing to be aware of is that you don't have sufficient subfloor ventilation because the vent to the rear is being blocked by the extension, and the front vents I don't think are performing particularly well anyway, but you need through flow of vapour. You can see there's condensation forming on the cold water pipes. You've got a fan going, which is good, but there's no through flow. It's really just on one side, so you're going to have a risk of mould here, and the best solution is either use a dehumidifier or increase the ventilation, and you might have to do that by putting an inline fan here. I would expect anyway, cellars are made to be damp, so this is impermeable surface. You've got water that's percolating underneath, which is normal. It's what cellars are meant for. There's obviously some dampness in the wall here. It's actually drier than you might think. Let's put it onto there. Wow, it's drier than upstairs. Ironically, it has been damp proofed here. So this could be just historic. And besides, it's probably been kept relatively dry. Small damp proofing treatment here. There you go. It's been bricked up, so probably reducing the airflow because of that. But I don't see any signs of... there's a bit of what could be early signs of there's woodworm there, but it's probably historic. There's a bit of mould there. I'll give you some solutions for that. Is that the... Oh yeah. So what I would say in conclusion, the cellar is as you would expect it to be, a bit damp. The flow of air has been reduced in part because the extension at the back, and the floor, well, that was something that was dropped on that section of floor, but it's always going to be at risk and I wouldn't be too concerned about it. The ventilation in this property appeared reasonably good. Bathroom vent around the utility area and in the kitchen. But you have to remember that when it's raining outside, the air that you're replacing any extracted air with is going to be quite full of vapor. So when it's raining outside, it's because there's condensation. If any of the walls go down to the same temperature as the outside temperature, then you're at risk of having mold and condensation, even with just ventilation. The solution is insulation, dehumidification, and increasing airflow. Here are the graphs from the data loggers. The first one is the ground floor flat A. We can see the top line, the dotted line at the top, the green line at the top, shows the surface relative humidity, which is always above the 85% relative humidity. Second graph is the upstairs flat. It's also very high, and that's also primarily caused by poor insulation, in their case from poor loft insulation. The other graph is the dew point differential. This is showing you that there's more vapor in the second bedroom compared to the first bedroom. You'll only know why. It may be because it's near to the bathroom and the bathroom has the door open. The dew point graph shows the difference between the dew points or vapor in both properties, property A followed by property B. The idea is to keep the dew point as low as possible, at or below the external temperature. That's the red mark. I don't have the data for the whole time, but you'll see the thin black line, that's my own property, and I'm able to keep it much, much lower than that, and that's by using a dehumidifier, as well as a continuous flow bathroom extractor fan. Here's the top floor flat. We can see there's higher dew point in the top floor flat, and they have a different type of risk, and their risk primarily comes from, well, not only the hygroscopic salts, but the poor insulation, the poor loft insulation, as well as lack of kitchen extractor fan. In both cases, I saw examples of clothes being dried internally, and that should only happen if you have a dehumidifier. It's very important. I personally run a dehumidifier 24/7 with it dripping into a sink when I'm away, set to 70% relative humidity, and use a continuous flow bathroom extractor fan. That's one that's blowing out at about 5 litres a second constantly.